In the United States, if you physically attack someone, you not only could go to jail for that physical attack, but if that person dies of injuries from that attack, even years later, you could be facing some sort of murder charge. And that is where Gary Anderson finds himself today. Domingo Tapia, a 38-year-old immigrant from Mexico, he was having a few beers with his brother in June 2017, and afterwards he left on his bicycle around 1:30 in the morning. Well, he turned around. Being a fruit vendor, he had left some fruit at the bar. He grabbed the fruit and he waved at his brother goodbye, and off he went. Mr. Tapia would eventually approach Fulton Street and Albany Avenue, where Gary Anderson, who was 26 years old at the time, was standing at the corner milling around with some guys, and it looks as if they were in an argument. Well, right when Mr. Tapia pedaled into the crosswalk, Gary Anderson stepped into the crosswalk. He took 2 steps and he punched Mr. Tapia. And Domingo Tapia fell off of his bicycle and he hit his head on the pavement. That one punch thrown by Gary Anderson, a fitness trainer at the time and a youth coach at the YMCA, would change both men's lives forever because, see, Domingo Tapia would be rushed to Kings County Hospital where he would eventually have 2 surgeries and be put into a medically induced coma, and he would not ever wake up. Mr. Tapia's wife, Esther, of 15 years, the two of them had 2 sons, Pedro and Jose, who were 5 and 7 at the time. She began to worry because it was getting later and later and her husband wasn't at home. She would eventually get a call from Kings County Hospital, and where she would eventually arrive, seeing her husband battered and bruised, not knowing what happened because he couldn't talk to her. Mr. Tapia would not ever talk to anyone again, as a matter of fact, and it would be at least a week before Esther Diaz found out what happened. Miss Diaz was called down to the police station where she sat next to her brother-in-law, and they watched a grainy video, a surveillance video, shown to them by the police where they saw Gary Anderson and Domingo Tapia come into contact with each other at that intersection. And for reasons unknown to both families, Gary Anderson punched Domingo Tapia. Both men are described as devoted fathers. Gary Anderson, the father of 3 girls, and Domingo Tapia, the father of 2 boys. And Shakia Lloyd, Gary Anderson's sister, said that he's the youngest in the family and that he started fitness training to get away from troubles at home. She said, nobody knew of him as a troublemaker. I've never even heard him raise his voice. Shakia Lloyd went on to say that her brother, Mr. Anderson, was a very charitable person, that he brought bags of Christmas gifts to their grandmother's house, that he organized donation drives in the neighborhood. Miss Diaz and her husband, Domingo Tapia, they were undocumented immigrants, and so they did never get legally married in the United States. And she said that at one point she had to prove her marital status to her husband just to be able to visit him in the hospital where, like I said, he lay in a coma. Well, eventually paperwork was sent from family members in Mexico, and so she was able to keep a visual somewhat at his bedside, even though travel would only get harder after her husband was transferred to a long-term care facility. And while Mr. Domingo was in a coma at a long-term care facility, Gary Anderson was being moved from prison to prison in upstate New York. You see, he had been arrested a few weeks after the video had gone public, and he pleaded guilty to felony assault. No one knows what happened for certain when these 2 men met up at that intersection, but the prosecutor stated that he believed that Mr. Anderson was in an argument with these men standing at that intersection and that his punching Mr. Tapia was random. The prosecutor would go on to theorize that he believed that alcohol had something to do with it, that when Gary Anderson drank, that he would go into a rage. In fact, a few months after he was released in 2022, Mr. Anderson, he got a DUI and he was sentenced to 1 year of alcohol treatment. 7 years After Mr. Anderson punched Domingo Tapia at that intersection, he received an attempted murder charge. He allegedly shot at a man at a bar after he and the man got into a really heated argument. That was June 2024. And just a couple of months later, Mr. Tapia would also die. This would be 7 years after Gary Anderson punched Mr. Tapia at that intersection, and Mr. Tapia fell off of his bicycle and hit his head on the pavement. And it was just 5 years after Mr. Anderson was released for serving time for felony assault of Domingo Tapia. Well, now Gary Anderson faces manslaughter charges. Anderson was released on his own recognizance, and he said, I felt like I did what I had to do, and now everything is coming back again. Whatever Mr. Anderson admitted to in his guilty plea of felony assault of Domingo Tapia can be used against him in a trial for manslaughter of Domingo Tapia. What do you guys think? Do you think that because Gary Anderson pleaded guilty to felony assault and he served 3 years in prison, do you think that is fair to charge him with manslaughter? Because Domingo Tapia actually died from his injuries from that one punch in June 2017.